America, once a land of freedom and prosperity, ravaged by the fires of war, a nation consumed by chaos. Yet chaos cannot reign unopposed. America was bathed in anarchy for centuries, but eventually the sentinels of the past, the Enclave, re-emerged, chased back the wasteland from their home, fought hell and won. They took their homeland back, soaking the ground with their blood in the process. The entirety of the East had been reclaimed, but the West was still infested with the usurpers that had claimed power in the Enclave's absence. No longer shall they defile American land. The Enclave will reclaim their nation, by any means necessary. In 2310, the Enclave reignites their march westward, and this is where the story begins. The Enclave war machine continues its expansion of territory and assimilation of the local populations. Under President Autumn, any opposition crumbles against the Enclave's will. With the East Coast secured, Autumn sends the majority of the Navy to Alaska to establish a foothold in the area. Meanwhile, the Enclave begins encountering extremely resistant tribals as they approach Colorado. More organized than regular tribals. Not an army, but the remnants of one. They refuse to be conquered, so that's how they'll die. As superior as they are to ordinary tribals, the Enclave still annihilates them. Yet it does slow down the Western expansion considerably. Eventually the tribals are dealt with, although this only reveals a greater enemy in their path. Organized, advanced, and numerous, the forces stationed on the western border aren't equipped to fight an army. In response to this news, the Enclave deploys reconnaissance aircraft over the enemy, too high for them to detect. High Command confirms the opposing force as the New California Republic. The Republic is a sizable foe. They will not fall as easily as the tribals previously encountered, and nothing but their unconditional surrender is acceptable. It will take time for the Enclave to move its forces to the western border, time which the Enclave clearly does not have, as the Republican forces discover them and immediately recognize them as the Enclave, forcing the vastly outnumbered Enclave forces to retreat while the reinforcements arrive. Within mere weeks, however, the reinforcements have organized and begin assaulting the Republican army. The Enclave's equipment is decades ahead of the Republic's, but the sudden change from tribals to trained soldiers leaves the Enclave's effectiveness at less than optimal levels. In response, High Command requests support from the Navy in Alaska. Although barely set up in Alaska, half of the fleet sails down the west coast of North America. Meanwhile, back on the front lines, the Enclave are gaining their lost territory back, but not fast enough. The Republican Army begins deploying Rangers to carry out covert ops against the Enclave, crippling the Enclave's supply line. The Enclave forces just aren't trained for this kind of engagement. With little options, High Command creates a new Special Forces unit. The most elite soldiers are handpicked for the task. They are trained further in covert operations and woodland warfare. To complete this new unit, Enclave R&D works alongside Modus to create power armor with inbuilt optical and audible stealth capabilities. The completion of this unit falls in line with the arrival of the Navy on the coast of California. The Navy begins to attack the Republic's heart, forcing them to move more resources to defend themselves on the coast, allowing the newly created Wraith unit a much easier path into enemy territory. The Wraiths begin sabotaging enemy equipment, destroying resources and slaughtering soldiers. The Wraiths slink through the shadows, crippling base after base, turning into the Enclave's most effective weapon. The Enclave forces soon begin pushing the weakened Republican army back through Colorado. Once the region is secured, Autumn orders the Navy retreat from its bombardment of the coast, the army set up a defensive line at the border, and the region be searched for an old bunker. In the following weeks, the NCR builds up its own defenses preparing for an Enclave attack, but that won't be needed, as the bunker is finally discovered. Autumn himself flies to Colorado to witness its opening. The Enclave opens the bunker to be greeted by nothing but the rusted metal sounds of the door. Autumn enters the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, NORAD, or what's left of it. The complex is completely dark, not even the emergency power remains. Everything, including the inhabitants, is dead. The rest of the soldiers think that they've just opened a tomb, but Autumn is aware of the capabilities of the complex. He orders the power be restored and the systems be repaired. The power generators are soon returned to operation and the facility springs back to life. The consoles light up and the facility shows the silos ready to fire. Autumn now has the key to immediate victory. Now he orders the rest of the military into position. As night falls, wraiths are dropped into the Capitol building of the NCR. And as morning comes, the NCR president is greeted by Enclave soldiers holding him at gunpoint. They force him to sign an unconditional surrender. And when he refuses, they give the signal and Autumn authorizes nuclear launch. In an instant, Dayglow is vaporized and the sky in the NCR lights up. Understanding his position, the president of the NCR has no choice but to surrender to the Enclave. So, now the Enclave has control over the NCR, and once they reach Vegas, they encounter another old world ghost, much like themselves, and they strike a bargain with him, allowing Vegas to stay independent and the Enclave to receive advanced technology from Vegas. The Enclave now controls almost all of America, yet many in the NCR refuse to surrender, and once the Enclave begins taking over the Republic's governance, they resist. This becomes a large problem as the Enclave now has to put significant resources into policing the new territory and ensuring the local authorities don't sympathize with the rebels. While the Enclave eventually takes down the majority of the threats by allowing martial law in the new states, many of the rebels retreat away from the population centers. The threat of these rebels is thought to be minuscule, but not long after, the Enclave starts being hit hard from guerrilla attacks, crippling their supply lines around the region. To counter this, the Enclave recruits former Rangers into Wraith and deploys Wraith units to track down the enemy. Upon scouting of the enemy force, it is revealed that the rebels have allied with the Brotherhood of Steel. Alarmed by this, High Command diverts all available resources to destroy the threat. Wraith tracks down the rebels, then the cavalry comes in to eliminate the hostiles and gather intelligence on other installations. One by one, the Brotherhood bases fall to the Enclave, and the Brotherhood are pushed further and further north. Eventually, the Brotherhood is forced into the remains of Portland. Rather than stepping into that hellhole and giving the Brotherhood the advantage, the Enclave scrambles all air support in the region to firebomb the city. Thanks to the elimination of the last major threat to the Enclave, they were able to reclaim the rest of the country within only 2 years. Finally, the Enclave had finished their mission. The 50 states were once again united, and they were no longer an enclave in their own country. They were once again America. But they aren't done. Not yet. The army is still expanding into Canada and down into Mexico. But more importantly, there was the first directive. The very first order meant to be carried out by the Enclave, even before the reclamation of the country. The complete destruction of China. Now that America is whole again, Autumn has the power to ensure its destruction and prevent them from rising again as America had. The nukes at Cheyenne Mountain would certainly do the job of eradicating the remains of China, but there's only a small number of them. Targets for them would have to be found, and even then, there may not be enough to destroy the commies. An invasion of China would be the best approach. It would also allow the Americans to reclaim all the military hardware left behind from the last invasion. The military thus begins preparing for an invasion, although, given the state of their own country, mainly the fact that they're still recovering from a nuclear war, the invasion couldn't take full priority. But within a year, the invasion force is primed and they set off across the Pacific. Once the fleet comes into view of China, they come under fire from the mainland. The fleet immediately deploys fighter jets to strike the coast. After only one strike, the gunfire stops. When the invasion force lands, they are greeted by what looks to be pre-war American soldiers. The first response is hostility as the invasion force believes it to be a trick by the enemy. But the soldiers surrender themselves without a fight. They then proceed to explain how they are descendants of the American invasion force and how they've been fighting a new Chinese empire. The soldiers welcome everyone back to their base where each side exchanges explanations. Afterwards, the invasion force agrees to aid the military remnant in their efforts to exterminate this new Chinese empire. The military begins launching aircraft over the reported population centers. But they soon learn the Empire has access to their own air defenses and even some aircraft. forcing the military to begin a campaign of ground assaults to disable the enemy air defenses. However, the Chinese forces turn out to be poorly trained and fail to stand against the combined American forces. One by one, the Chinese holdouts are invaded and the defenses are neutralized. One by one, the cities are nuked. Although eventually, the silos at Cheyenne run dry and the military is forced to deal with the remaining cities the old-fashioned way: blunt force. Thanks to the Empire's lack of navy, the Americans can freely move their ships into position where they can bombard the cities and destroy the aerial defenses, allowing the Air Force to swoop in and carpet bomb the cities. The American forces leave absolute destruction behind them as they make their way along the coast. The Americans soon reach the capital, where the remainder of the Emperor's army lies. At first, the Imperial forces manage to hold the Navy at bay with the use of their aircraft, but once the Americans deploy the Mark IIIs, the dominoes begin falling down. The Empire's aircraft are decimated, and the Navy as well as ground artillery begin firing on the capital, annihilating the remaining defenses. The air support then comes in, firebombing the remains of the city and dropping troops down onto the royal palace. The soldiers then push their way through the last of the defenses and execute the Emperor, following this by lacing the palace with explosives and getting extracted in vertibirds. As the vertibirds fly away and the soldiers watch the palace explode and crumble into nothing, they come to an understanding. Their crusade that had spanned so many decades, so many miles, was finally over. As one last piece of insurance, the Americans released a monster into the wild, a resurrection of one of their old science projects. This weapon would destroy what remained of China. With everything taken care of, the invasion force and the military remnants headed home, being welcomed back as heroes. The Enclave's mission was over, but the new America had just begun its journey to global reclamation.